Every day in April, I painted a face. Sometimes they were young, sometimes they were old, they were black, they were white, they were male, they were female. It was part of a challenge called 30 Faces in 30 Days, run by Sketchy. And I was a tutor, so I had pre-recorded 5 of those days, so I did actually have a little head start. But I also decided to take part as a participant because you can learn so much in 30 days, and that repetition of doing something day after day after day is really good. I thought at the end it might be useful to pull together some of what I learnt and also some of what I learnt about taking part in a challenge like this, so that if you decide to do a challenge, you'll go into it with your eyes open. So before we jump in and I start showing you the paintings and actually what I learnt techniques wise, I just want to say it's hard work. 30 faces in 30 days is a big commitment. It takes a lot of time, so be realistic. If you go for a challenge like this, either carve out lots of time for yourself or don't beat yourself up if you get behind, because each day there was a lesson that was between an hour and a half, so you need to watch that, and then you need to paint your version of the portrait. You could try painting along, but that's quite tricky. Even if you watch the film on double time, which I did quite a lot of the time, that's still going to be 30 minutes to 45 minutes. And then you need to paint your version. Be realistic. Can you find 2 hours each day? If you're already pretty busy, that's a stretch. I'm a very loose watercolour painter, or relatively loose, but loose doesn't necessarily mean quick. Even if the end result looks quite spontaneous and that it didn't take much time, often it can do. The biggest thing, of course, that you learn doing a challenge like this is there's no one right way of painting a portrait. There was 6 different teachers and we all did 5 days each, and our styles are really different. One will paint with a size 1 brush, all very tiny. Another will do very stylized faces. Another will aim for realism. Another will try substituting different colours. No one was right, no one was wrong. That was another thing I really learned from the challenge. What is obvious to you and easy for you is not obvious or easy to other people. It is so much harder to paint like someone else than it is to paint like yourself. So enough of the comments, let's jump in and look at the pictures. And I've tried to make notes on each page of what I felt I'd learned. So this is day 1. This is one of the lessons I prepared, and it was about doing a tinted background for a pen and wash portrait. What I hope people will take out of this is how the underpainting, the colour you choose, really alters the emotion of the piece, even if the colours you use are actually identical. For day 2, what I really learned was just how much a bit of a patterned background, something that you've chosen that relates to the personality of the portrait or to the setting, something like that, how just a little general pattern can really add a whole new dimension of both meaning and the feeling of the portrait and make it feel more complete. This was day 3 with a lot of wet work to get some soft edges, and I know, and I'm sure you know, just how important soft and hard edges are in watercolour, but this really just reinforced that for me. I asked students for any feedback on what they felt they'd learned from this challenge, and one person said, so Deborah Dunlap said, "Look, before you slap paint all over your planned highlights." And it's so true. In here, say this shape on the nose and how it goes into the glasses, really, really important. Or this that just indicates the lovely shape of his cheek or the top of his head here. And once you've lost a highlight in watercolour, you've really lost it. So I did love that comment from Deborah. Now, I found this day particularly hard. It was an artist called Kyle Legaspi who had put the lesson together, and she'd picked this, can you see this muse. Half of her face was in really deep shadow, and I did struggle. I know that you should paint what you see and not what you know, but I felt that I could see the eye going on where she was saying, oh no, leave that out and we'll make this really dark shadow. I felt a bit like she'd had half her face gouged out, and I didn't like that, but I was trying to be obedient and follow instructions, so I stuck with it. There are elements of this that I really enjoyed. And interestingly, what Kyle does is often underpaints with cadmium red to fix the features in place. Now, she paints with a size 1 paintbrush. I hardly own one, so I was adapting things. But that underpainting with the cadmium red is certainly something I will be doing more of. One of the students, Ruth Neary, was saying that her big learning was value is more important than colour, and that's absolutely true. We did a number of monochromes throughout the 30 days, this being one of them, with Anna Vivian, who is from Brazil. And I love a monochrome. I really enjoyed it, and I found a paint that I hadn't used before that gave me lots of lovely marks. But just look at how much you can put into a painting only using one colour, and that really does let you concentrate on lights and darks and really sort of telling a story in a very simple way. I certainly learnt something about myself during this challenge. I found this so hard to paint. I didn't want to at all. I wanted to miss this day out. And I think it's because it's such a sad inspiration. The muse looks really depressed and far away and lost in not happy thoughts. And I just realised that in the end, I'm quite a simple, cheerful person. I'm not sure I'm given to lots of introspection. So I struggled with that. And I guess following on from that is big learning. What you find easy, other people find really hard. And isn't that bizarre? Because, hey, it's easy, but it's not. So this was one of my lessons, and I thought, oh, what's a really simple way of doing a portrait and really enjoying what watercolour can offer. And you basically have a fairly chaotic wash, but because you're really careful with your highlights and with your tones, the face emerges from that chaos. And to me, that is really easy. That was really simple and obvious. Boy, did some people really struggle with this. So it's not a bad thing to always remember, yeah, what you find easy, other people don't, and what you find hard, vice versa. I love this lesson from Charlotte Hamilton because what we did was actually, we didn't do a pencil underdrawing, we went straight in with a paintbrush. So what it taught us is watercolour actually is more forgiving than you think. But also we painted this upside down so that we really drew and painted what we saw, not what we thought we saw. And I was very chuffed when I turned it the right way up that it actually vaguely looked like her. So that was a real confidence boost that perhaps I don't always need to have a really good drawing, that I can actually observe and work quite spontaneously. What struck me during the month is just the variety of faces. Sometimes people ask me, oh, what colours should I use to mix skin tone? There is no such thing as skin tone. And, you know, forget all the big variations between a Caucasian skin and maybe a Latin American skin and a black skin or an Asian skin. I'm not talking about that. Just within faces, just within one face, you can find areas that are really purple or areas that are really red or areas that are really yellow. Often where we're bony across our forehead, it can be very yellow. Often there's quite a lot of blue around the jawline, even in women, but you know, obviously in men you can get that sort of 6 o'clock shadow. You know, we do have lots of red around our nose and ears. So there is no such thing as skin tone. Now, this was another of the sad muses that I really didn't want to paint. And hence I did a line and wash. I didn't follow the instructor and I just did how can I do this quick? And it did remind me how quick a line and wash can be for capturing a lot of information. And one of the students, I think I've made a note of it later on, said, you know, a little line work can save a failed painting. Now, I plan this as line and wash, but sometimes if you've done something and you're not that happy, a little use of ink really can save the day. This piece again reminded me of the importance of hard and soft edges. You know, there are some very hard edges around the face to really focus on the face, and then this is a lot softer down here because this isn't important. This is just supporting information. I'm not sure what I learnt from this portrait, apart from the fact that I will never stick pearls on my eyelids. I mean, we're back to a monochrome here because I really wanted people to concentrate on sort of making the pattern and tone and so forth. One of the great things of this challenge is that you learn about new colours. You get introduced to colours that you just wouldn't consider in your palette. You know, I said I've fallen in love with cadmium red. I tried to introduce people to this mix, which is perylene maroon and sap green, which makes a really good skin colour. Probably two colours that you wouldn't think to put together. The other thing that I really wanted to introduce people to is it's a playfulness. So I used stenciling in the background to introduce some pattern and stenciling on his clothing. And Carol Duran really fell in love with stencils. And when I said, what have you learnt from the challenge? She mentioned those. This was one of my least successful days. And I guess it just reiterated for me that being able to paint and being able to draw a likeness are two different skill sets. As a painting, if you just looked at that and didn't look at her, I think it's a perfectly acceptable painting. Some people might not like the green I put in there. I rather enjoyed it. But when you start to look here, she's a totally different person. So, say, being able to draw likeness, being able to paint a portrait are two equally important skill sets, but they are different. So, if you need to use, I'd have been far better off if I'd actually traced her or used a projector or used one of those transfer methods. Then I'd have had half a chance of getting her to look like that. I drew her freehand and she doesn't look as she should be intended. I just made that forehead so short. Luckily, this was one of my happier days, and it did remind me about the importance of using lovely, yummy paint. For me, the paper is the most important thing in watercolour. Actually using really richly pigmented paints in a well-chosen palette makes a huge difference to the success of your painting. This day made me laugh because it was back to one of Kyle's lessons. She does love this beautiful palette that goes from the sort of earth yellow right through the reddy browns up into the purple. She uses a lot of mineral violet, which is this colour, rather than I always tend to go to dioxazine purple. But again, I rediscovered mineral violet. She loves a size 1 brush. I think I said that before. So her painting, I think, was probably about this big, and I just had to paint bigger. We're all different, and it's a good reminder that we all bring ourselves to the painting. Ah, yes, it was a student called Annalise Zimmerman, and she said a ruined painting can be rescued with fine liners. Well, I didn't want to draw this one. This was another of the muses that just didn't appeal at all. You know, this woman's screaming, whatever. So how could I do this in a fun and quite quick way? Well, good old fine liners, and indeed some line with pastel pencils came to the rescue. Here's another day that just reminds us yet again that tone is the most important thing. There is a lovely phrase, colour gets all the glory, but tone does all the work. In this lesson, it was all about a line and wash portrait, keeping the clothing maybe quite fun and sketchy. And it did remind me, because this was one of my lessons and I did her first in pure watercolour, and I and then I did her again. I was just trying to do that quite quickly and seeing if there was a way that I could use pure watercolour and do that all quite rapidly. I just really struggled, whereas I could do this within the sort of hour that I was allocated. So the next 2 days really reminded me, there's a phrase about the curse of the beautiful woman. They are very similar subjects in there's a lot of shadow across the face. This woman's standing by a fence, and this woman has the shadow from that heavy fringe. I found her a lot more interesting and easier to paint. I so struggled with her, and in the end I think this is a young, pretty, very perfect face. This lady doesn't have such a young, pretty, perfect face, but it's a face of interest, and I had so much fun painting her. So the curse of the beautiful woman is real. This day I really, really enjoyed. I loved this guy's face and I loved painting him. And I did go off piste a bit. I didn't copy the style of the tutor. And I guess it just reminded me that there is no one way, there is no one right way of painting. We've all got to do our own thing. I had great fun with this day because the model, I mean, it's not a terribly good likeness, but the model was just so beautiful to paint. I mean, his hair is just so gorgeous. It did remind me, though, that our paper is so important. So at one point I was trying to soften her jawline because I felt that I'd been a little heavy on it. And the paper I used started to pill up and wouldn't let me lift at all. It would let me layer upon layer, wet in wet, really happily. But the moment you tried to lift, it was not happy. Pay your money for your paper and don't worry about the paint so much. I was very nervous painting this picture. I've never painted an underwater or semi-submerged subject before, and I really wanted to get that transparency and that feeling of the water. And I thoroughly enjoyed it in the end. I didn't paint it in the same way as the tutor. I didn't have the time to do that. And I sort of did my own thing, but really concentrated on cool and warm colours to try and get that underwater feeling. And I do think it's worked. So sometimes you can do an awful lot more than you think you can. This was one of my lessons. And the reason I did Mr. Rainbow Man was just a reminder to have fun. Let's not take ourselves too seriously. This was my last week and I'm heading towards the finish line. Not sure what I learnt from this, but I did enjoy it. Day 27 and day 28 is just a great reminder again about skin colour. I mean, this woman obviously has got far deeper, beautiful tones with all the purple coming into the shadow area. This woman is incredibly pale, and again, she's still got those tinges of purple coming in, but just very different. So looking at those individual skin tones and just reveling in them is one of the joys of portraiture. And then this is day 29. I wasn't looking forward to painting this chap because, frankly, I looked at his hair and his beard and thought, oh, give me a set of clippers. I'd just like to spruce him up and tidy him up. So I resisted that temptation and I did lots of wet in wet. And I sort of got to this stage and thought, do you know what? I think I'm going to stop there because I could have carried on layering and tightened things up and just left this almost like an underpainting. But by adding a little bit of definition for the glasses, I left this sort of chaos of his beard and hair, and in the end I really, really like that as a portrait. And then this is the very last day. I have to say I was really glad to get here. 30 faces in 30 days, bloomin' hard work, but you do learn a huge amount. So if you have a chance, give it a go. Set yourself some realistic expectations. Understand that it is going to be hard work. Carve out a lot of time, but boy, will you learn a lot in the process.